Oh boy. Okay. Again, lone wolf though, right? Suzuha? Not by choice, of course. My dad left me. Ooh. It said 1975. There's that pin. Right. Change it to 2010. Oh, yes! And our butterfly takes off. Of course. Official confirmation, I suppose. Suzuha? Love that. Whoa. Resistance force, right? I've got my answer. Now it's time to go back to 1975, eh? That D-mail. Yeah, that's the one. So that's the big enough change then. Drastic change. Interesting. And for that she must go to 1975. Checks out. Confirmation. She left at the shrine. You did. Okay. Indeed there is damage. I love that. Look at this. Come on. Yes. Oh. Okay, so yeah, Okabe, there you go. Big choice he made on that night. Hey. Okay, good. He's reeled it back in a bit. Someday. Ah, okay. He's got quite a bit of practice doing that. To hell and back. I mean, he's not back just yet, is he? Great transition. Look at that. Wow. Yes. This should be really interesting. Once these two have a look inside, let's see. Still missing. Oh, look at that. Come on, Daru, let's go. Okay, so it said 2010 on the pin. The best. Okay, Daru, speak to me. There it is. There it is.
天音氏の親父さんって僕たちの近くにいるのかな。2010年に僕たちがこの秋葉にいるって知ってたんだよね。
多分直接聞いたわけじゃないから。私、父さんには会ったことないし。全部父さんの遺書に書いてあったんだ。父さんは
Look at this. Look at this.
タイムマシンの研究をしてたの。未来を変えるためにね。私はその意思を継いでここにいる。
正直すまんかった。1975年から戻ってくるまでに親父さん探しておくから。
Different side of Daru, eh?
オカリンには内緒で伝説のアニメラジ。
That's a great scene, man. And, you know, it's beginning to make it even more clear that indeed it could be Daru, right? Wow. This is quite a determined Daru, locked in. I never met him. She didn't say I never met you. Ah, resistance. I don't know if it's meant to be a carefree life. It might appear like that.
Hey, master. Hey, master. It's so cool.
You can't do that in the dub. You just can't. No can help. Look at this. Son of a bitch. Right. Good thinking. Could be. The lettering, huh? It's great that they're able to fit in these moments of levity, right? This, I love this so much for Suzuha, man. Ah. Great shot. Exactly.
それじゃあ天音も手伝って。そして狭いタイムマシンの中、うだるような暑さに僕らは恥ずかしさも忘れて服を脱ぎ。
They're doing the whole please don't let this be her dad. It's her dad. Again. Mayuri sees the bigger picture. About that.
初めてこの時代に来た時、知ってる人は誰もいなくて、この時代の方がすごく平和なのにさ、なんだか私にとってはすごく怖かった。でも今はこうしてたくさんの仲間ができた。この時代に来ることができて、君たちと同じ時間が過ごせて。
I had a lot of fun coming to this era.
ほんのちょっとでも ラボメンの一員になれてよかった。
Okay, this sounds like a goodbye though.
一緒にいられてよかった。
鈴葉。
きっと未来を変えてね。今みたいな自由な世界に変えて。
鈴
Ah.
葉。はい。
Yeah, that really kind of got me, man. The tone of that.
父親が分かったということか。すぐに行く。待ってろ。
What? Hold on. I've seen that framing before. For Ocarine, specifically. Hold on. Am I about to get bamboozled? After pretty much almost, all but officially confirming it that it probably is Daru. Look at this. A little twist right at the end.
So am I about to be bamboozled, right? Is there a possibility of that? I mean, if you look at the setup, if you look at the cliffhanger, yeah, sure. One thing is clear. It's about to be an interesting development, right? But is it about to be as big as actually, pivoting to this twist after all but confirming that indeed it is Daru, right? That Daru and Suzuha have this father-daughter relationship, right? I mean, there's just too much. There's simply too much to overlook. And the crazy thing is, you could go all the way back to episode 10, right? And there, Daru's already essentially the prime candidate, right? Top of the list. A strong possibility as, Suzuha's father. But now here, this just kind of makes that case so much stronger, almost airtight, almost, right? Like I said, it all but confirms it officially. I mean, before I go any further, I do believe it is Daru. I don't think it's really truly about to pivot into, a totally different person as her father. I mean, at this point, that truly does feel exceedingly unlikely. But, that being said, I do believe there is room here for something interesting, and, it doesn't have to be positive either. They've got to be careful. It could be a setup, right? It could be a setup. I'm not saying the guy on the street is in on it or anything, but, you always have to think about that CERN angle, the Moeka angle, the goons, Moeka's goons and all that, FB and all of that, right? So you've got to keep that in mind. I mean, this episode does a good job of almost, almost making you forget about some of that stuff for a moment at least. And that's by design, right? And that is one of the reasons this episode is almost such a wholesome episode for the most part, like in a bubble, right? Because ultimately all of these things are still at play, right? All of these things. But it's good. It's a great approach. It's the right approach, right? Because the last few episodes, there's been quite a bit, right? Quite a bit of intensity and tension, and this kind of releases that tension a bit, right? But you can't let this, the tone of this, the approach of this episode, again, for the most part, let you kind of drop your guard too much, right? Because these things are going to escalate once again, right? And quite suddenly, most likely. But yeah, I really enjoyed the tone and approach of this episode, especially because it kind of pivots around Suzuha. And not just Suzuha, Daru is in the limelight as well. And, this is an impressive guy. He's actually quite exceptional. He is. And, it's great. It's great to see him get a bit of that spotlight now, right? Hell, there's this scene, and it's one of the best scenes of the anime, for me at least. It's just the heart-to-heart, between Daru and Suzuha, right? You see the Suzuha actually does kind of open up quite a bit, right? She felt that she could open up. And, because of all of this, you do get to see a different side of Daru, a side that's always been there, clearly, but you don't get to see it all that often, if much at all, right? But I get to see it. I get to see this is like I said, this is a really impressive guy. Like Ocarine said, Daru's got serious skills, right? And don't judge a book by its cover. I mean, this is the guy. Daru is the guy. He is that guy. And like I said, it's a strong possibility that he is Suzuha's father, and ultimately the creator of this time machine, the one that allows a really specific type of time travel, right? Now, in the last episode, I made the point that, perhaps the time machine itself, this one, could be the crowning achievement of the Future Gadgets Lab, right? The ultimate collaboration, their ultimate gadget, right? Future gadget. But, in this, it's actually specified that it's actually more so her father, right? Rather than the actual Future Gadgets Lab. Now, listen, clearly in the future, it doesn't quite exist in the same capacity, the Future Gadgets Lab, right? It doesn't quite function in the same capacity because it's not able to function in the same capacity. And you see, given the hellish dystopia they're a part of, you see that, the roles become a little bit different. I mean, you look at Okabe Rintaro, who does move on to become, the leader, the founder of this resistance, right? The anti-CERN resistance force, a famous terrorist. Again, that's a matter of perspective, though. So, I think I discussed that possibility a couple of episodes ago, this idea of, Suzuha being, actually not even a couple episodes ago, I think a long time ago at this point, early on in the anime, around the time Suzuha is introduced, and then, I get a few episodes of Suzuha, I think I made the point that, she could be the last remaining member of a resistance group, right? It appears to be the case, right? Something really similar is happening or has happened. You go back to the opening. It does show us this hellish future dystopia that she comes from. Again, a lone wolf on the run, always on the run. But like I said during the episode, of course, it's not really by choice that she is a lone wolf, right? But, on the flip side of that, one of the reasons I enjoyed this episode so much is because it does have one of my favorite components of this anime present throughout, right? And simply put, it's just them spending time together, right? And Suzuha being a part of it. Suzuha getting to experience something so, beautiful. And it's just something as simple as friendship, being around people that care about you and people you care about, right? She didn't have much of that, if any, from this future she comes from, right? But here, it's the opposite of that. Her found family, her actual family is clearly present within this group of people as well, right? But certainly a found family, for sure. Because, ultimately, if it is Daru, Okabe is essentially her uncle, right? It's that type of relationship, that type of dynamic, those types of bonds present within this group. They're more than just friends, right? This is family. It is. I've made that point before, this idea of found family and these misfits being brought together by Okabe Rintaro, right? Him being that magnet, right? Him facilitating all of this. So yeah, of course, even though there's a lot of strong elements present within this episode and much to discuss, just that aspect of it, them spending time together and Suzuha being a major part of it, that right there is almost enough, for me. To make it such a great episode, an excellent episode altogether, right? That being the core component of this, time spent together. Because listen, like I've said since the beginning at this point, and the beginning of Suzuha becoming a constant of the story, is that through the drip feed of her kind of slipping up and essentially painting a picture of this dystopia, this hellish future that she comes from and had to live in, exist within. You see that she's had it rough. And this is a young person. This is a young adult, a teenager that's had to really toughen up. And listen, she is tough. She's really tough. You see in that flashback, I mean, isn't it interesting, calling it a flashback, even though it's from the future. But, technically, it's her past now. Suzuha's present is now, right? And her future is going to the past, right? That, at least that's, the goal of this, ultimately. Fixing the time machine and her going to 1975 to retrieve the IBM 5100 and, getting it into Okabe Rintaro's hands, right? Of course, she she might not be the one who literally puts it there, but she facilitates it, right? And then, of course, you've got Ferris and her father, and their, again, association or attachment to the IBN 5100. And then, of course, you've got Ruka's father and, him saying that, the person who left it here, they told me that a young man is going to come for this at some point. And that young man does come for it at some point, right? Alongside his assistant at the time, Makise Kariso. Another great episode early on, right? The hunt for the IBN 5100 that takes him to the shrine. And then, of course, on the way back in the opening to the next episode, you see that Suzuha's got that cheeky smile on her face, right? She knows exactly what this is because she facilitated it, right? She made sure that it gets into Okabe Rintaro's hands. And, now, looking back at it, it just makes you feel so good, right? Makes you feel so happy for Suzuha that, in that moment, she sees it play out. She sees that, okay, good. I got it into Okabe Rintaro's hands, right? He's got it. He has it. And, she's so cheeky, right? She's like, oh, is that the IBN 5100? And this is after, Okabe is being a little bit protective. He's like, oh, it's a big secret and all of that. And she immediately just, again, playfully just said, oh, is it the IBN 5100? Because again, of course, at that point, it's clear that she knows. She knows it's the IBN 5100, right? But of course, that feels like it was a lifetime ago, right? Within the context of, this anime and the episode count, because Okabe Rintaro has drifted quite a bit from that timeline, right? He's moved on quite a bit. A lot of D-mills have taken place since then, have been sent since then, right? And now, that IBN 5100, it's a bit of a mystery, right? The disappearance of it and all of that. And, in the middle, there's other shenanigans like Moeka clearly bamboozling them and, sending that D-mail about the location of that. But then also, that really interesting idea a little bit later on that she's actually rather upset and just really desperate. And at the end of the line, essentially, as, Okurin runs into her, she's just on the ground, and I think she says something like, I don't understand. FB said it would be there, but as things stand, the plan of action at the moment is to go to 1975 and retrieve the IBN 5100, right? And again, ultimately get it into Okabe Rintaro's hands. But then, of course, speaking of D-mails, you see the consequences, right? Cause and effect, the choices, the what if scenarios at play. Because that choice Okabe Rintaro made all that time ago to stop Suzuha from leaving ultimately caused the damage, right? Her sticking around and the time machine itself being exposed to that thunderstorm and, that rainstorm, I suppose, that caused this, right? But it's a bit of a pros and cons type situation, isn't it? Right? Because if you really look at it, it messed a few things up, right? But it also it facilitated a few other things as well, right? Now, because she's around, right? Because he made the choice. Again, I did say at the time that, it's a bit of a selfish choice as well, making that choice for her, right? On her behalf as well, because he just couldn't, listen, it comes from a good place, right? It comes from his heart. Don't get me wrong, of course, right? He just hated the idea of her leaving, under that dark cloud, alone. The whole point was to, make her feel that she is a part of this, that she is a part of this group, right? That she has these people, right? So, someone like Okabe Rintaro, who has a heart of gold, right? A big heart. He does. He just couldn't stomach that idea, her broken up, leaving, again, under a dark cloud, under those circumstances, not coming across her father, right? The thing is, he also kind of directly had a hand in her not having that run-in with her father. Again, I'm just assuming at this point it is Daru, right? It is. The crazy thing is, let me quickly, jump to this. Even after all of these telltale signs and just so many notches on the, Daru's the father's side, the one thing that almost confirms it for me is just that really silly moment of Daru actually unknowingly essentially hitting on his own daughter, right? Kind of, being a bit of a perv around his own daughter, right? just being Daru around his own daughter, right? That right there is a staple. It's a textbook approach. And, you saw my reaction. It immediately gets that desired reaction. It's like, ah, shit. It's that, it's that notion of, oh my God, he doesn't even know it, but he's saying this to his own daughter, most likely. Just the use of that trope, just that scene itself, that it is, written into it. For me, that actually is one of the strongest, confirmations almost, right? That indeed this is a father-daughter relationship, that they are using, that gag. A bit of, Back to the Future coming in, of course, Marty and his mom, and, some of the really uncomfortable situations that come out of that. But then, of course, alongside us, the audience, who is essentially pretty locked in at this point of it being Daru, you've got Mayuri, right? Once again, seeing the bigger picture, being in a position to look at these things, because again, the others are preoccupied, right? They have their own things that are going on in those moments, right? And this allows her to really see the dynamic between Amane Suzuha and Daru. She sees it, right? She can intuit it at that point in time, just through their interactions. Even if it's Daru doing his perv thing, there's something about just how they are around each other. But yeah, back then, Ocarine tricks Daru into coming to the lab, even though he's got that thing, right? The time travel forum meetup, right? Promising that, God damn it, I'm forgetting the name now. Ferris might be there, right? That she'll be present. And he comes running, of course, as expected. But, that takes him away from this, time travel forum meetup, right? And that is the exact place Suzuha goes to. And ultimately, clearly didn't run into her father. Now, see, here's a bit of a interesting thing that's at play here. Daru does not recognize the term or the name, the moniker, the code name Beryl Teeter, right? He just doesn't. Suzuha said it again in this episode. And, she said it back in that episode as well, in the conclusion of that episode, after Ocarine sent that D-mail, right, to stop Suzuha from leaving in her time machine. Though at the time he didn't actually know specifically that she, got back into the machine and left. He just thought she left town, right, through other means. Yeah, in the end of that episode, she explained that, her father's name, again, it's a code name, is Beryl Teeter. Now, if Daru didn't recognize it here, right, her saying it here in front of everyone that, she didn't actually know her father's name, but she did know the code name, how exactly was she expecting to actually ID him at the meetup then, right? As you'll remember, my assumption was, okay, maybe Daru's using that code name or that username on the forums, right? And that is how, if Daru happened to be there and wasn't pulled from there, that's how they could possibly meet up and run into each other, or, that's how Suzuha could approach him. But no, that's not the case, because Daru does not know that code name, but he does now. He does now, doesn't he? Before her father actually names himself or gives himself the code name Beryl Teeter, right? So, there's actually a few really interesting moments here that could be bootstrap paradoxes, right? That in some form a bootstrap is at play, right? Be it the time machine itself, the internal build of the time machine, right? And, that was my thing. I kept really anticipating that, once both Daru and Ocarine get a look inside of the time machine, that's going to be quite telling. And, that's exactly how things played out here. But, the difference is it's only Daru, right? I love that shot of, the wide shot of the interior of the time machine, and Daru's head comes in first, right? And he's quite impressed by the future people, FTW. He's the one who recognizes the similar build to their own gadgets that they are, making at the moment, primarily the phone microwave, right? The one that facilitates the D-mail phenomenon and all of that. So, the moment he recognizes that, that's all but confirmed that, okay, indeed, this is Daru's doing, and, perhaps Okabe's doing as well. But, I think they're really kind of shifting here. They've shifted the focus here quite a bit to Daru, right? And, like Suzuha said, my father left this time machine for me. So, it's kind of pivoting to this idea of, okay, Daru kind of, works on this, and Ocarine kind of pivots to becoming this leader of the resistance force, right? Maybe that's through choice, by choice, they decide that, okay, Daru, you focus on this. You focus on cracking the code. You focus on just making it possible, right? And I'll focus on this side of things. And yeah, as you kind of think about it, since day one, Daru is the one who kind of is the handyman. He's the one who's got his hands in the actual build of these things, right? He's always the one who's kind of confirming, okay, it's ready to go. Oh, hell, he even actually helped Makise, right? In the technicalities of it. Of course, now it's that iconic scene of Mayushi asking Ocarine to hold up that costume. And then, of course, around the same time, you see Makise declare that this is the time leap machine, right? And you see it's Daru who's kind of putting in the final finishing touches, essentially, right? And he gives her the thumbs up. So yeah, it certainly adds up. It does. But I just kept thinking that, yeah, it'll be Future Gadgets Lab, and this is their crowning achievement and all of that. But as explained by Suzuha, yeah, it's a different life. It's a different time. Sure, even if it is just Daru who had to focus on this, as Okabe had to do something else there, perhaps to give Daru the best chance possible to accomplish this, to complete the construction of this time machine, right? For many reasons. Could be for many reasons, because ultimately Okabe does make that choice, right? He thinks it's pathetic that he is able to move on from the death of Mayuri, that, not only he allowed the death of Mayuri to happen, he then, gets caught up in this whole, really pathetic idea of rebellion and resistance and all of that. Again, it's a case of your present self not quite understanding just yet, why exactly your future self ends up doing the things that they do. Same thing kind of applies to Makise Kurisu here, right? She's still just baffled at the notion that, she does work for CERN and in some capacity, right? I mean, not in some capacity. She's kind of she's presented here, through Suzuha as essentially the head honcho, the one who kind of leads the whole thing for CERN, right? The mother of time travel, and all of that. And again, this is tough, understandably so. It's something really tough for Makise to stomach at this point, because her present self can't even fathom that she could possibly make the choice, right, herself, to actually go work for them. And yes, I'm still going to maintain that. Of course, there's no change of heart. There is no, heel turn or anything. I don't think that's at play here. I think there's other things that essentially made it play out in this manner. So yeah, just like how Ocarine finds it disgusting almost that, he's able to move on, that he's able to make that choice to move on, from Mayuri's death, and kind of almost... again, at this point in time, from his perspective, right? And it's quite a harsh appraisal of his future self. This notion of, oh, you gave up on Mayuri? How could you possibly do that, right? How dare you? But he does. His future self does, right? But here's the thing. He doesn't have the context, right? He just doesn't. And this is a thing I brought up on a few occasions at this point throughout this anime and the analysis portion of it. This is a staple of time travel narratives, isn't it? You're not always able to understand, how, why exactly or how exactly your future self got to a certain point or are able to do certain things, right? But I'm sure if you actually, gets a full rundown of it, it would probably make sense to him, right? And to me as well. But, I'm just kind of assuming that, of course, it's all for a reason he got to that point. But again, Ocarine is looking at it from his own perspective that, he himself, his future self, was able to move on. That's how he's looking at it, right? He's not looking at it as, oh, there could be a method to all of this. There could be a really significant reasoning to all of this, right? See, my running theory on this at the moment, at least, I suppose, or my speculation on this is that, they understood, the Future Gadgets Lab, this group of friends, they understood that, of course, in this, in this dystopian future, under the oppressive rule of CERN, right? They're not going to be able to function as they could back in this time, right? So you have to just kind of go with the flow, right? And adapt So I think they might have actually taken a different approach here, right? I think there is a possibility here as well that both Daru, right, Beryl Teeter most likely, and Okabe Rintaro know that, Makise is going to go join CERN. So as far as speculation and theories are concerned, I'd say at this point I'm kind of beginning to kind of put together this notion or this idea that, okay, they took all of that into account and decided, okay, Daru, you focus on this, right? You focus on accomplishing that time machine, right? I'll do this. I'll be the face of this rebellion, this resistance. See, the thing is, as far as the Future Gadgets Lab is concerned, it changed forever, right? At a really specific moment in time, it changed forever. And that moment is the moment Mayuri died, right? It simply cannot be the same after that. How they function, and again, just beyond that, the whole, dystopian future under CERN's rule, Iron Fist, and all of that, it just could not function in the same capacity anymore, right? I think even if it wasn't that type of dystopian future, after losing Mayuri, there's no chance it could have been the same, right? Some things are changed forever. She's, like I've said on a few occasions, she's like the soul, the heart of this group, right? Of this lab even. And once that is snuffed out, that light, things changed. Clearly, they changed. And then, of course, it is that episode that really makes you think, okay, it's entirely possible and perhaps likely that, Makise Kurisu is, she's not choosing to do this, but she's being forced to do this, or she's being put in a position to make this choice, right? That she has no other choice but this choice. They might have told her that, they'll execute the rest of her friends, that they'll go out there and maybe kill her parents. I mean, who knows? Who knows, right? Could be many things. So yeah, of course that could be a choice, because ultimately, if it is just, work for us, or, we'll kill you, of course she'll say, yeah, go ahead, kill me, I don't care. I think she'd rather die than to, work for CERN, right? She's disgusted by them and their practices and all of that. But, once you start bringing in her friends, perhaps her family, right? Her mom and all of that, then maybe it's like, crap, they got me, right? But that's just one possibility. You can also try to look at it from a different angle, right? That they all made the choices to do these things, right? Perhaps maybe they got together and they decided, okay, Daru, you focus on this. You accomplish this, right? You make it happen. The time machine. I'll step up. I'll be the face of this resistance. I'll be this terrorist. Again, matter of perspective, and I'll lead this. And perhaps they all decided that Makise actually should go there to CERN, right? And she'll have everything at her disposal. And ultimately, as Suzuha said, she's considered the mother of time machines, or time travel, time machines, right? So you've got Daru doing it on this end, right? Doing his own thing, separate from CERN, right? And he comes up with this time machine. And then you've got Makise from within CERN cracking the code as well, and, developing a time machine for them. But ultimately, right, kind of being a mole on the inside as well. Because simply put, I just do not believe that Makise Kurisu is capable of defecting and, going against her friends, turning to the dark side and all of that, right? And you see it through her reaction now in the present, that it's just a baffling notion. The whole idea, the concept of it is just so far-fetched to her, right? But if you look at it from, again, the other perspective, that, maybe it's all by choice. These are deliberate choices that all of them had to take, roles that each one of them had to take in this dystopian future. And, the thing is, our Ocarine, the present Ocarine, might think that it's pathetic, right? And that it's just unforgivable that, his future self could move on from Mayuri. But there's always a possibility here that this might be for that exact reason. Doing all of these things, Makise on that end, developing a time machine through CERN. You've got Daru, right? Accomplishing this time machine. And then, you've got Ocarine doing his part as well. It all might be because they still believe these things can help Mayuri. That ultimately, these might be the steps that have to be taken in the long run. These have to be the roles that have to be taken up in the long run to perhaps save Mayuri. I mean, listen, just a couple of episodes ago, Makise said as much, right? I consider Mayuri a close friend, that I do want to save her, right? I don't think she's forgotten that, but as those cops close in and Okabe, kind of did his thing to get them out of there for a bit at least, trick them out of there, that Makise and Suzuha scene is such a standout moment, for me at least, because there you see true character, the true character of Makise Kurisu, right? But more importantly, Suzuha gets to see the true character of Makise Kurisu, right? Who she really is at this moment in time, in the present, now, right? It's such an interesting dynamic because, Suzuha's past at this point in time is the future that she comes from, right? But this is Makise now, right? Right in front of her. This is who she is. Her actions speak for themselves, right? She extends. She opens the door for a connection, reiterates that here and now, this is who I am, right? This is what I stand for, and you're a fellow lab member. Not through stories and legends and all of that, but through Makise Kurisu's actions right now, in the present, she gets an understanding for who Makise Kurisu truly is. And just that moment of Suzuha cracking that smile and giving her hand to Makise, just that shot of it, it's such a great moment. Such a great moment. And again, the getaway scene that commences after that, and the use of the score, it's such a hype moment. It's such a great moment. Love that scene. But circling back to the Suzuha and Daru scene within the time machine itself, as he is getting an understanding for the internals of it, the build of it, and again, it begins to feel quite familiar to him. So throughout that conversation, you really get to see that Daru is inspired by Suzuha, right? He's inspired by her resolve, her dedication, her strength to carry on, right? Given, all the things that she's been through, given her age and the pressures of all of this, right? That she still perseveres, right? And I kind of touched up on it for a second. You see that in that flashback, right? Again, the dystopian future she comes from, she actually appears to be even more mature and hardened, right? Appears to be even more tough. Again, it's a necessity. You have no choice but to be that tough. You have no choice but to toughen up, right? It's that or you die. But the thing I love so much, and it's something she really appreciates as well, as she tells Okabe Rintaro near the conclusion of this episode on the rooftop. And like I said, it really kind of begins to feel like a goodbye. It really begins to turn to this idea that she feels that she's not going to get another chance to say this. So she really wants to say all of that right now. Just how thankful she is for all of this, that she really is quite grateful to all of them, right? For giving her just a semblance of a normal life, right? Facilitating that. Ultimately, she really got to be her age for a moment in time, right? To let her guard down just a tad bit, in comparison to the dystopian future she comes from. And that's why anytime I see Suzuha get to experience these things, I always said, right, I love this. I just love this for Suzuha. Since the beginning, I've always just, felt for this young person, that she really had to, toughen up and grow up, given, again, the circumstances, right? But here she's kind of allowed to be her age, man. She's a young person. But again, I'm not saying that she completely forgot about her responsibilities or anything, but, for a moment in time, she is able to maybe, again, let her guard down a bit and let go of it just for a bit, right? Though again, as she said, she spent too much time here, even though ultimately she does leave, right? It's Okabe that stops her from leaving. So that's always a constant in the back of her mind. And, she said something really interesting and something that just makes so much sense, right? She said that even though this era is much more peaceful, she found it really quite frightening as well, right? Because ultimately, it's the fear of the unknown. This is not her normal day-to-day, her normal hour-to-hour, or even her normal minute-to-minute. To her, normal is that dystopian future. She understood those living conditions, right? Having to navigate those conditions. Here in this era, it's something else entirely, isn't it? Right? It's also foreign and new to her. And of course, she did her best, but she also met these wonderful people, And as she said, I have so many friends now, right? I really had a lot of fun coming here to this era. You really truly gain an understanding, much more of an understanding of just how much she cherishes the time that she had here, right? And as you saw, I got a little bit misty eyed. It really got me there. Especially because it became clear as well that this is a goodbye, a definitive goodbye, right? As she said, I feel like I might not get another chance to say this. And then, this might have something to do with the earlier scene that kind of lit a bit of a fire under Daru as well, right? You see a much more determined Daru after that scene. He's joking around about bringing that animation cell, and then he notices, this is tough for Imani Suzai, and, she tears up. So clearly something's up, and perhaps Daru actually is able to intuit at that point that, yeah, maybe she's upset that this might be, goodbye, a definitive goodbye, right? And perhaps that leads to him being even more determined to, make it all just, work out. And, even a little bit earlier, you see that Daru understands, right? Through Okurin's tone and his approach, he understands that this is serious stuff, right? And Daru just locks in. You see it, again, through some great animation. The expressions on Daru's face, right? He understands. You see it for a split moment, for a couple of seconds even. He understands just the magnitude of this, that he is going to take Okurin's word on it, that, okay, this is important, that he really, truly get this done. Now, perhaps it's a little bit far-fetched. Maybe it's a little bit unrealistic that, Daru could get it fixed just in 2 days' time, right? But it looks like that's exactly how it's about to play out. He feels quite confident that he'll get it up and running, right, and functional. But again, you cannot overlook that the internal components of it are really quite familiar to Daru, right? So here, this kind of reminds me of the point I was making a little bit earlier about, setup for bootstraps, right? Be it getting a look at the internals of the time machine, right? And then kind of understanding and remembering that as he builds a time machine, perhaps in the future, throughout this dystopian future that they are a part of, for a time at least. Because of course, one by one, they all die, right? As Suzuha confirmed. And it's actually all left to Suzuha through her father's will. And, I'm thinking about just the notion of her knowing the term reading Steiner. And, the meter itself, the divergence meter in her possession, are these things that are also kind of left, to her, through Daru most likely, right? Because, again, Okurin asked, did my future self give this to you before dying? She said, no, I never actually met you or met him in the future. Okabe Rintaro, that is. Yet she has the meter, right? And she also knows the term reading Steiner. Now, initially I just assumed that, okay, maybe Okabe, it is Okabe, right? And he loves the term itself. So he might have maybe told her off screen. That was just kind of my immediate, thought on it. But now that I'm looking at it, based on some of the other things that she has in her possession as well, maybe she is left a dossier. And, within that might be all the information that she needs, right? About perhaps Okabe Rintaro and this really unique ability or condition that he seems to have. And it's called reading Steiner, right? And that would make a lot of sense, right? If it is coming through her father, who again, I believe to be Daru. And of course, if indeed Daru is her father, it makes just so much sense, doesn't it? Because Daru does know about Okabe Rintaro and his thing and the name for his thing and all of that. Though it could be something even more simple. Maybe it is just this open thing that is just known, throughout that resistance, this legend that's passed down, or just an open secret, or just a thing, that our leader, the person who made this, the person who established this resistance force, Okabe Rintaro, he had this thing, right, that he is able to observe the changes and all of that, right? But the meter itself, she's got no use for it, yet she still carries it and brings it back to Okabe Rintaro, gets it in his hands at this point, right? And she keeps it simple, right? This has to hit 1%. It has to go beyond 1%. And of course, one of the major components of that is actually this idea of erasing that update or that email from the CERN database, right? Because at first, the monumental D-mail that he sends in front of the radio building, that's the thing that sets it all off, right? That lands on their radar, essentially, because they're, they're using this thing to track everything they can about time travel. And that's it. That's the moment, right? So it's not even specifically that, someone stabbed Makise Kirisu. It's more so it's the first active, functional D-mail, right? And it's substantial enough that it changed the timelines, the world lines. And not only that, right? Again, there's a strong case here, as they've kind of, showcased in the last few episodes, right? This idea of alpha and beta, that it was actually substantial enough to move them to this alpha timeline, right? But they're trying to go back to that beta timeline. And again, it checks out, right? Because 2010, that moment in time, the invention of time travel, right? Technically, it is one of those points, those major branching off points that allows you to jump from alpha to beta or beta to alpha, right? As she specified in the last episode. And of course, to get into that database, to hack that database, and delete that email, though I'm not sure if it is about to be just that simple, but that's certainly one component of it, right? But ultimately, you need the IBM 5100 to do that, to hack into CERN's database, right? Now that some of that confusion's been cleared up, that whole thing of, gaining access to it even without the IBM 5100, right? And knowing about the Jellyman's report and all of that, but it's all been cleared up at this point, right? So yeah, Suzuha, in this present timeline, has to go back to 1975 to make sure that ultimately Okabe Rintaro gets it. Oh, and really quickly, as I am on the topic of, Suzuha and, her time machine, of course, Mayuri is quite concerned about Suzuha. She just, she hates the idea that Suzuha has to do this alone, right? And if she could, she'd join her and be there by her side. Just, a support system. Like I said, a couple of episodes ago, even if, Okabe doesn't see anything, if Makise and her father potentially meet up in that place that she name dropped, just having Okabe there as a support system, that can be incredibly supportive, right? Same type of thing at play here. Mayuri thinks that, it could be really nice if she could just be there for Suzuha. And, at that point, I pointed it out that, this notion of if the time machine could carry more than one person, one of my running theories, one of my, main theories, since day one, and since, Suzuha has become a important component of all of this, is that indeed, I believe that, in episode 1, that time machine that lands, I do firmly believe there's 2 people that time traveled within that time machine, right? Suzuha herself, who I see on the rooftop, right? And then the other Okabe Rintaro that's running around in the halls of the radio building, right? And everything else that kind of takes place at that moment in time, right? Ultimately leading up to that monumental moment of Okabe Rintaro sending that D-mail, the first email, ultimately setting it all off and, landing on CERN's radar from that point on. It really was kind of like the beginning of the end. But see, as I am kind of talking about this and kind of going through the events of episode 1 again, as I like to, almost every episode, if I do get the chance to, I'm a little bit surprised that Okabe still hasn't really thought about that, that Makise Kirisu dies there, or that he saw her dead body, right? Again, let's always kind of, leave that door open, that he didn't actually see her dying or getting stabbed. He saw her dead body bleeding out. And then again, it fades to black. It cuts to him being outside, right? Really quite shook up. And then who comes in to, break him out of that little daze he's in? Mayuri. Mayuri is actually quite puzzling in that episode in many moments. As you'll remember, I'm looking at her and thinking, the camera is focusing on Mayuri and she's smiling at this moment, even though Okarin himself is quite rattled and confused, right? In a bit of a daze. But again, the odd thing is that Okabe has still not thought about that aspect of it. That in the halls of the radio building, he comes across the dead body of Makise Kirisu bleeding out. I mean, it's got to hit him sooner or later, right? And once it does, that's about to do a number on him, right? As if he needs any more of that. Because he'll begin to understand, oh my God, it really might come down to a choice here, a rock and a hard place. They're trying to get back to the beta because Mayuri might live, right? She might live. Though, Suzuha doesn't quite confirm it or anything. She said probably. She didn't really want to make a definitive promise either. But yeah, if they do manage to get back to the beta timeline, yeah, there's that problem now. Makise Kirisu ends up dying there. But then again, like I said, there's no chance Okabe is just going to, leave it at that. That ultimately he has to make a choice. No. He'll try his absolute best to, somehow make it so he can save both of them somehow, right? And you see that clearly Suzuha is going to be part of that as well. Again, episode 1, rooftop. So going back to the initial point, at some point, that time machine, or see, I don't know, it could be a different iteration of this time machine as well. It is going to allow more than one person inside to time travel together, right? It's kind of shown me already in episode 1. But, once again, quickly going back to the possibilities of bootstraps being set up here, there's many possibilities. Again, stuff like Daru getting a look at the internals of the time machine ahead of time, essentially, right? And again, that facilitating his build in the future. Then, of course, Beryl Teeter. That, that does not ring a bell to Daru. He did not react to that. But now he knows. Right? And then there's also the pin itself. Ocarina said maybe it hasn't been created yet. Again, all of these things could easily be, setups for bootstraps, right? Them getting a look at a lot of these things ahead of time. And then, having that knowledge being a part of the creation of many of these things. But yeah, let's see. Are there other moments that I kind of forgot about? Yes, there's that one scene I was speaking of, right? The time travel meetup, the time travel forum meetup that Daru is pulled out of, right? And again, he was actually quite agitated about the whole thing. But, the point here is that, okay, so why, now that I know that, it doesn't ring a bell for Daru, the code name Beryl Teeter, because he's actually hearing it before actually ultimately using it himself, most likely, right? Again, pretty sure that's, Daru, right? Her father. So if he doesn't even recognize that name just yet, the code name, why was Suzuha expecting her dad to be there at the time travel forum, right? Because again, I was under the impression that she saw the name, the actual code name Beryl Teeter being used as a username in the forum. So she just assumed, so that's my father, right? So if he's saying that he'll be there at the meetup, I just have to go to the person that's using the code name Beryl Teeter. Boom, there it is. That's my dad. But now it's been made clear that no, he doesn't even know that name just yet, the code name Beryl Teeter. So it's not that, right? She didn't see the code name being used in the forum at all. So I'm trying to think, what exactly gave her the hope that he might be there, right? Because she really truly felt that this is her one chance. Like she felt really strongly about it. Blind faith, perhaps, just based on the notion that, okay, it's a time travel forum meetup. My dad made this time machine, so, he's meant to be around in 2010 and, most likely he'll show up here as well, right? I guess, as I'm saying it kind of checks out. It kind of makes sense, that thought process. But yeah, I think to end it off, I'll go right back to the beginning of the episode again, just a quick flashback of, again, the dystopian future she comes from, begins with the oppressive sun once again, right? Beaming down, almost, kind of like symbolic of the eye in the sky, right? Symbolic of CERN's constant presence as well. And, once again, it kind of maintains that constant red light that's always showcased in any of these scenes of the dystopian future. I got a glimpse of it back really early on, episode 2 even, right? Around the time this new John Teeter, right? New from Ocarina's perspective at least, takes those message boards by storm. And of course, Makise Kirisu is there. Of course, she's there. Episode by episode, they made it clear that she's into all of this stuff. She's dialed in. She's just up to date with all of this stuff, right? She's just like Ocarina, essentially, and like many of these other people. And there's many hints of this leading up to this, right? But yeah, there's always that depiction of the red light, the all-seeing eye, essentially, right? Surveillance. So yeah, of course, a really deliberate choice to have it be this punchy red, right? In a depiction of a world that is just drained of all color, essentially, right? I mean, it's effective. It's simple, right? It's rather simple, but it's effective. It is. And then it gets to the point of her being inside of the time machine that her dad left her. And, the first thing I see is the actual mission day, her actual mission, right? 1975. July 28th, 1975 to be specific, right? But after lingering on it for a moment, she has a bit of a change of heart, right? And again, they show us the pin in her hand. She decides that she's going to go look for her father first. Now, that right there is interesting, isn't it? Couldn't she just, get the IBN 5100 and then, go to 2010 anyways at some point, right? To look for her father, Daru. It's interesting that she felt the need to do that first before commencing with the specific mission at hand, right? But that trajectory would have been a bit more in line with the hoax John Teeter from real life, right? I think I brought this up a couple of episodes ago, right? Her trajectory is essentially the opposite. She might get to meet a family member before going back to retrieve the IBN 5100. So yeah, it is an interesting choice, and they focus on it as well, that she decides that, she'll go see her father first. And right on the top of the screen, as, it showcases the inputs, again, quite reminiscent of Back to the Future as well, it said FG204 just at the top left, right? So I'm not quite sure, what that is exactly. But yeah, I think that does it for this one, folks. I mean, one thing that's kind of really clear to see here is the shift within Ocarine, now that he has his friends around him, now that he has his friends helping him, right? Now that he's confided in them, much like how Suzuha has confided or opened up a bit with Daru as well within the time machine, right? You can't go it alone. You just can't. But again, it's best not to land ourselves in this false sense of, okay, everything is fine now, right? It's fine for a moment, and I'm so happy that he is surrounded by friends again, and that, all of them are in on it now. They understand everything. He told them, I mean, not quite everything. There's still a few secrets that he has to keep to himself for now, though I do think, ultimately, and I think it's going to happen at some point, he's going to have to, share with Mayuri as well. Listen, he might be underestimating Mayuri a bit at this point. Yes, it comes from a good place for sure. He's being protective, but he might be surprised by how Mayuri actually handles that situation. Again, possibly learning about her death, right? That there's this insane cycle that he's been a part of, and he tried everything, and she dies anyways. But yeah, I do believe that he'll be surprised. With how Mayuri takes that and handles that. Because again, sooner or later, he'll have to tell her. But yeah, I think that'll do it for this one, folks. If you enjoyed that, consider dropping a like, consider dropping some comments, give me your thoughts. If you are interested in early access to the next few episodes right now, or full opacity or timer-based full length, consider checking out the Patreon page. The links are in the description and the pinned comment. Also links to social media if that's your thing. Right then, thank you so much for joining me, folks, and thank you for your time, because time is precious. It really is. And I do hope to see you again soon for the next one. Until then, take it easy.